on the case for Christ. Whereas, as Uncle Steve has said, we're looking at Christ from the angle of a courtroom, and all of us are being the jury. So last week we started with a quote from C.S. Lewis where it says, "If Christianity is false, it's of no importance whatsoever. If it's true, there is nothing more important." And we said that this is a really strong statement. But it leaves us with the question of, is it true or is it false? So we threw ourselves into the courtroom last week, and as you as the jury are deciding whether Jesus Christ is guilty of being true, is guilty of being the Son of God, and if he's guilty of being resurrected. So you have been and you will be tonight presented with some facts that will be based on logic, and majority of the facts are going to be taken from outside the Bible. So last week we specifically focused on looking at the eyewitness accounts, and examining the record is what we titled the little section. So, are the biographies that we have, are they able to be trusted? Can the eyewitness evidence be trusted? And we started off by sort of doing a mini brainstorm of saying, what do we need to see in an eyewitness to, what are the key ingredients so that we can believe them? And some of the things that were called out, we said that we have to, hear directly from the eyewitness. They have to have been able to witness what occurred. The eyewitness themselves needs to be trustworthy. The testimony needs to be trustworthy. And there has to be, if there's multiple eyewitnesses, they have to be consistent without being, colluded. And it has to be in a timely manner as well. So if we quickly just summarise what we looked at last week, we summarise the evidence that we looked at by saying that we hear directly from the eyewitnesses. We can have absolute confidence in the Bibles that we have on our laps because that they are aligned to what the original texts say, because we've got a number of manuscripts. So we talked about specifically for the New Testament, there's 24,000 different manuscripts. So we can be really confident that it does match the originals. And we can have confidence due to the recency of the manuscripts as well, being within the lifetime, and we compared them to a number of ancient writings where they're over 1,000 years between when they occurred. So the actual testimony from the eyewitnesses, we are confident that we've had that recorded correctly, but what about the eyewitnesses themselves? Well, we looked at them. They had no personal gain in their lifetime for providing these records. They testified even when it put themselves in bad light. And then the consistency between the eyewitnesses indicated that they are independent witnesses without colluding. So tonight we're going to analyse Jesus and research the resurrection and see whether the actual content of the testimony itself is true. We can trust the eyewitnesses, we can trust what they saw, but what about the actual content? Do we have some other evidence to align to that? So we're going to analyse Jesus now. We're going to begin with that. We're going to see whether Jesus really did exist. We've got a Bible that tells us that he did, but is there any other evidence? And one of the things that we want to look at is something that's called corroborating evidence. Corroboration is the ability to compare information provided by two separate sources and find similarities between them. So when a second source provides the same or similar information to the first, the second source is considered corroborating evidence. So if we use an example, if I was to see someone driving a green car smash into a white car and then drive off, I'm a witness to that crash. The corroborating evidence would be the dent in the white car with little bits of green paint, and the dented green car would also be corroborating evidence. Corroborating evidence is important, so if we use a bit of an analogy, we all know how an umbrella works. Look at corroborating evidence as though it's the little spokes. You need to have a number of spokes to corroborate the original story. The more that you have, the stronger the umbrella, the less likely that you're going to get wet. So is there enough credible evidence for Jesus outside the Bible that we do have? We're going to look at three main pieces of corroborating evidence, and you may recognise these names, but they were written by a person called Josephus. There's also Pliny the Younger, and there's another person that's called Tacitus. So Josephus, we've quoted him a number of times before because he was an important Jewish historian. He wrote most of his 4 works towards the end of the 1st century. So in his lifetime, he was actually a Jewish priest, a scholar and historian, and was well known for providing a link to the secular world of the Romans and the religious world of the Jews. Josephus had this to mention in one of his writings. He says, and this was around the death of James, who was the brother of Jesus. He says, "About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, for he was one who performed surprising deeds, and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many of the Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Messiah, and when, upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate had condemned him to a cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a 3rd day restored to life, for the prophets of God had foretold these things, and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has to this day not disappeared." So I've highlighted just some key bits of information in there, but I'm going to come back to. But we're going to have read a little excerpt from Tacitus. Now, Tacitus was a Roman orator and a public official, and he's actually regarded as the greatest historian to write in the Latin language. I don't know too many historians that write in the Latin language, but still being regarded as the best has to count for something. Tacitus said, this is about Emperor Nero's decision to blame the Christians for the fire that had destroyed Rome in AD 64, which was a fire quite likely actually set by Nero himself. It says, "Nero fastened the guilt on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition thus checked for the moment again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome." This is written in 116 AD, so it has some old language in there, but you do get the gist of the message. And then lastly, we've got Pliny the Younger, or Pliny the Younger, I'm not too sure how it's pronounced. And he was a Roman author and administrator who left a collection of private letters that intimately illustrated the public and private life of the heyday of the Roman Empire. And Pliny the Younger said, "They were in habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ, as to a God, and bound themselves by a solemn oath, not to any wicked deeds, and never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up, after which it was their custom to separate, and then reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind." So that's alluding to the emblems. It's just some normal food. It's not that we're partaking of literal flesh and blood. So there are 3 completely different sources to the Bible, but what are some of the facts that we can actually uncover from each of those quotes? Well, and this is our corroborating evidence, which is quite interesting because there's a lot of facts that we can actually get about Jesus without reading the Bible. So if we completely ignore our knowledge of the Bible, what do we find out from these? Well, we find out that Jesus was a Jewish teacher. Many people believed he did miracles, healings, and exorcisms. Some people believed he was the Messiah. He was rejected by the Jewish leaders. He was crucified, and this crucifixion took place under Pontius Pilate and during the reign of Tiberius. Despite the shameful death, his followers who believed he was still alive spread abroad, and there are multitudes of them in Rome by AD 64. And all kinds of people from cities and countryside, men and women, slave and free, worshipped him. So that's quite an impressive amount of corroborating independent evidence. There's also an argument that Paul also corroborates the gospel writings. However, as we said last week, we're trying to avoid using the Bible to use our proof. But there is a number of sections throughout, Corinthians that we, touched on before our talk. There's also volumes of other writings from early popes and elders in the Catholic Church that are regarded as the apostolic fathers of the Catholic Church. Now, while their understanding of the Bible and the teachings is incorrect, they still do corroborate the evidence of the Bible, because there's many facts about his teachings, the fact that he was crucified and he was resurrected, that are written in quite a number of these apostolic fathers' writings. And there was one that was written by Ignatius, who records how Jesus was persecuted under Pilate, he was crucified, he was human, he was raised from the dead. Those who believe in Jesus could be raised from the dead. And all of these things were actually written before the Bible was put together, which absolutely adds to the corroborating evidence. Otherwise, it's just like me writing something about the Bible. So if we put all of these facts together, the writings of Josephus, the Roman historians, the officials, the Jewish writings, the letters of Paul, and from the apostolic fathers, we have this really persuasive evidence that corroborates the essentials found in the biographies of Jesus. So even if we were to throw away our Bibles, we still have a picture of Jesus that's extremely compelling and unique to the Son of God. So Uncle Steve mentioned before about scientific evidence. We're not going to spend actually a lot of time on the scientific evidence, so it's more just a bit of a side note. But I'm sure many of us would have read or watched a murder mystery of sorts, and there's so many scientific evidence that does come into play. Fingerprints and DNA to rely upon. And while in the case of the Bible, as Uncle Steve did say, we don't have DNA or fingerprints or blood samples that we can call on, archaeology is a form of science, and we can absolutely use that to rely upon. And it's important to call out, when we look at science as an evidence, archaeology can't tell us that Jesus was the Son of God. It can't tell us what he said or what he did or whether it was right. Just like fingerprints or blood samples at a crime scene can't tell what actually took place or how somebody was murdered. But it can confirm whether the geographies and locations that the Bible talks about is true. And this can actually place incredible credence on what the author has written. Just to throw it out there has been found no contradiction in any of the geographic references in the New Testament at all, full stop, which is actually quite astounding in itself. There's two professors that are regarded as the top 5 leading archaeologists in their field. One is called Nelson Gluck, and the other one is Ernest Wright, that have said in their experience, which is actually a lifetime full of archaeology, and they're recent, so they've only just recently hung up the tools, as it were. But they've said in their lifetime they are yet to see any contradictions to any geographic reference in the Bible, which is quite astounding, they mentioned, because the same can't be said about other religions. So what their focus was on was religious archaeology. They weren't able to find any contradictions in the Bible at all for any geographic reference. But when they looked at things like the Book of Mormon, they can't find any cities, people, place, nations, or names in any geographic archaeology dig. As a result, they've actually said that the Bible is now regarded as an accurate source book. So when looking at geography, the Bible is used as a source of information rather than trying to pull it apart. So that's really all I'm going to say on scientific evidence, but it's quite interesting because it verifies the recorded geographic locations that Jesus walked and visited, and they exist in exactly the same way in real life. So at this point in our case, we've examined the record and the eyewitnesses. We've built a case to show that these are incredibly reliable. We've analysed Jesus to build a case, not using the Bible, to confirm that he existed, and have corroborated what the Bible has said about him. we want to get into the main part here, which is researching the resurrection. And this is the key to the case for Christ, because this is where the challenge comes in. It takes Jesus away from being a historical figure. There's absolutely no denying that from the corroborating evidence, to being the Son of God. Without the resurrection, as we read in our reading, thanks Pipos for doing that, we don't have a faith, we don't have a hope without it. So it's significantly important. So there's a couple of questions that we're going to look at. Did Jesus die, and was he resurrected? So if you look online, there's a number of challenges, I guess, to what people believe, that Jesus didn't die or he wasn't resurrected at all. And there's a number of different ways that they do get attacked. So I'm just going to pick up on a lot of these different questions, I guess, that get asked about the Bible, and I'm going to try and answer them again, as I said, using some logic. So the first question there: did Jesus die? And the thought behind that was, there's this theory that Jesus was never resurrected. He actually didn't die on the cross. It was more of a resuscitation. So, he got taken into the tomb, he recovered from what he went through, and he walked out of the tomb, and there was no resurrection at all. So Jesus didn't actually die. So medically speaking, is this plausible? Is it possible that Jesus actually did survive what is on record? So medical professionals have provided the following information. Now, due to the age of a number of our attendees here, I'm not going to go into graphic detail. I'm just going to really use what is laid out from historical records and what the Bible says. But we're going to look at things from a medical angle. And we're going to just step through bit by bit, just to explore what Jesus actually went through and whether it is actually possible to survive, from the medical professional's opinion. So the Gospels claim that Jesus' sweat was like great drops of blood. Now, this is a medical condition. I'm sure that most of us have heard that it is a medical condition, and it's called hematidrosis. It's not common, but it is associated with a high degree of psychological stress, and the side effect to this is incredibly sensitive skin. After that, it's recorded that he was flogged. And so the flogging is a whip that contains metal balls, ball-bearing type things, and sharp bones. So the metal balls would cause deep bruises, and then the bones would cut the flesh severely. So it happened all over the back, the sides, and the legs. There's actually a historian named Josephus who says that it will result in veins, muscles, sinews, and bowels to be open to exposure. So many people, Josephus recorded, died from this flogging alone, but at the very least, there is a medical term called hypovolemic shock, which is where the body goes into shock because of the lack of blood as a result of this. And there's four main things that happen when hypovolemic shock happens. The heart races, blood pressure drops, kidneys stop working, and the person becomes extremely thirsty as the body craves blood to replace the blood volume. So you can, we remember from the stories, from the records, that Jesus says, "I thirst," was extremely thirsty, which is a bit of an indication of this happening. So at this stage alone, just from what Jesus has gone through, is in a serious to critical condition before there's any nails that were driven through his feet and wrists. The process of the nails going through the wrists and feet would have caused unbearable pain. And interestingly, in my research, the word excruciating actually came from this, which means out of the cross. You can see the cross part in the word there. Lastly, it's recorded that a spear was thrust into his side to confirm that Jesus was dead. And this was likely going through the lung and into the heart, and we know that because of the water and the blood that did come out. Medically speaking, from a number of experts that have looked at this, there is 0% chance that Jesus could have survived that. However, to provide further evidence, history tells us that with the Roman soldiers, if they did not kill the prisoner themselves, if they did not kill the prisoner, they themselves were put to death. So they're pretty good at making sure that their prisoners were put to death, as there's a huge incentive of keeping your life alive. I've missed my next little pictures there. Sorry. But let's play it out just for 1 second to say that the impossible occurred, that Jesus managed to survive the crucifixion. He managed to survive being stabbed in the heart with a spear. These well-trained soldiers did make a mistake. He was put in the tomb, and 3 days later he managed to recover and undo his linen wrappings and fold them up. He then was able to roll away the extremely heavy rock from the tomb, even though his wrists had gaping holes in them from holding up his body weight for hours. He managed to sneak past the Roman guards. He was able to walk to the disciples, even though his feet had gaping holes in them from the nails. Just think for a moment the kind of condition that he'd be presenting himself to the disciples, and how inspired they would be to go out and to proclaim that he is the Lord of life who had triumphed over the grave. So we have proof that Jesus lived. We have proof that he died. But let's have a look at the resurrection. And we've got a couple of things up on the screen there, because an empty tomb doesn't mean a resurrection. Did Jesus really come back to life? Was the tomb really empty? Did they make a mistake and they didn't actually look at the tomb? They just proclaimed that Jesus was alive. Did Jesus actually get put into a tomb? History tells us that around that time for criminals and things like that, they just tossed them into a fire and burnt them. Did they actually look in the right tomb? These are some of the arguments that have been put forward to go, did these things actually happen? So, as I said, we're going to look at these with logic, so I hope you'll just indulge me in a little bit of role play in just a second. Because one of the questions was, were there actually guards posted? Why would they have put guards there? Is there a chance that the guards weren't actually placed outside? The disciples were then able to just steal the body. Well, this is the role play. There were definitely guards, and the reason for that is because of the record that we actually do have. So here's my role play. The Christians are saying, Jesus is risen. He's out of his tomb. The Jews say, no. No, he's not. You've just stolen the body. Well, they respond and say, well, no, because the guards would have prevented the theft. And the Jews say, the guards fell asleep. And then the Christians go, no, you bribed the guards to say that. So our question is, were there guards? Well, if you look at this sort of exchange, at step 4, the Jews would have said, what guards? What are you talking about? We didn't put any guards in place. So clearly there were guards, because otherwise that's what the natural response would have been. Secondly, Jesus was definitely put into a tomb and not burnt, because if not, the conversation would have gone like this. Jesus is risen, the tomb is empty. And the Jews say, what tomb are you talking about? We burnt Jesus. And the Christians would have gone, yeah, that's a good point. Thirdly, there was definitely an empty tomb, and they definitely went to the right tomb. If there wasn't, the conversation would have gone something like this. Jesus is risen, the tomb is empty. The Jews would say, no, you're looking in the wrong tomb, or let's go check the tomb then. And the Christians would go, oh, okay. So you can see just by, on face value, we can go, it happened so far in the past, we can poke these holes in the argument, but logic wins out. And a side point, just historically, if we look at the empty tomb, we looked at last week that it was discovered by the women going to the tomb. I actually think this would have been a little bit of an embarrassing moment for the disciples to record. They were told all throughout Jesus' ministry that he was going to be resurrected on the third day, and they didn't believe it. They weren't there to actually go and witness the tomb. So this would have actually been a fact that could have been hidden up or covered up if it was a legend. Fourthly, there are theories that the body was stolen. So we just want to play this out and just look at the three main suspects of who could have stolen the body. So we have the disciples who, stole the body to create this massive legend. Or was it the Jews who stole the body to prevent the tomb becoming a shrine and people worshipping, the tomb and the Romans stole the body to keep law and order? Well, we know from later accounts that many of the first disciples were executed and exiled for preaching about Jesus. If they stole the body, we need to explain why they'd be willing to die for something that they have made up. Obviously, we know from history that people will die for a belief that they hold sincerely, but no one willingly faces execution or persecution for something that they know is an outright lie. The first disciples had everything to lose and nothing to gain from maintaining a lie. In addition, how could they actually get past the guards that we said were there in place? And if they did, why would they take the time to unwrap and leave behind the grave clothes? The guards are just outside. Why would they waste time neatly folding these grave clothes? If they were trying to steal a body, they'd be in and out as quick as possible. If the Jews stole the body to keep the tomb from becoming a shrine, why didn't they just reveal the body when people started to proclaim that Jesus had risen from the dead? This would be a surefire way to stop any rumours and this new religion from getting off the ground. But it obviously never happened. And people have put the argument to say that the Romans stole the body to keep law and order. The Romans were all about keeping peace, so there'd be no motivation to steal the body of an executed religious leader. Nothing more would cause more conflict than doing that. So from this, we can definitively say that Jesus was put in the tomb. The tomb was guarded. The tomb was found to be empty. The correct tomb was searched. There are no plausible suspects for stealing the body. But besides all of this, it's not actually the empty tomb that's proof of the resurrected Lord. It's seeing him after he left the tomb. So if we have a look at the list of people who are eyewitnesses, we have Mary Magdalene, we have the other women, at least two in Matthew. We have Cleopas and the other disciple. We have the 11 disciples and others, the 10 apostles with Thomas absent, Thomas and the other apostles, more than 500 brothers and sisters, and Paul in Corinthians. So if we were to put all of these witnesses onto a stand and cross-examine them for 15 minutes, that's it, just allocate 15 minutes, and we started at breakfast tomorrow morning, we actually wouldn't finish until lunchtime on Friday. That's how many eyewitnesses there are to seeing the risen Lord. So lastly, there's some circumstantial evidence that I want you as the jury to consider. What other pieces of evidence can we pull in that we don't, I guess, have any proof, but we don't have any reasonable conclusions to be drawn? And the first one is that the disciples died and were persecuted for their belief. We've mentioned this a couple of times, but why? Why would they do that? For good intentions? Well, no, because they're convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that they had seen Jesus alive from the dead. And we already explored that we've got these credible people with no ulterior motives, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, who all agreed that they saw something with their own eyes. So there's a difficulty in explaining that away. There's also skeptics who were converted after Jesus was resurrected. So we have James, the brother of Christ, and we've got Saul and Paul. And we've got the recording from Paul that he was completely against Christianity and did this 180-degree turnaround and then did miracles to back up his claims. But one of the key important ones was the changes in the key social structures for Israel and the Jews. So aside from being God's chosen people, one of the things that has made the Jews exist through history has been their national identity to their social structures that God entrusted to them. So, you know, the things that they did, like the sacrificing of animals, obeying the law of Moses, keeping the Sabbath. All of these things were things that they held near and dear to them for thousands of years. And within a short period of time, there's not just one Jew, but thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Jews were prepared to give up their social structures that they had held close to them and that had served them well for centuries. And it wasn't because they had stumbled on a new idea, and it wasn't that they were unhappy with their old structures. They were actually incredibly content and placed a lot of value in them. They gave them up because they had seen Jesus risen and miracles occur that they couldn't explain. What is the other alternative explanation for these three pieces of circumstantial evidence other than the resurrection? So it's going to be a shorter night tonight. We're going to summarise now. But what have we seen? We've seen that the record we have is accurate. We've seen that we can trust the eyewitnesses. We've seen that Jesus absolutely existed, that he lived and died, and we've seen that he was resurrected. And that leads us to our closing comments, because we started with this quote, didn't we? From C.S. Lewis, who says, "If Christianity is false, it's of no importance, but if it's true, there's nothing more important." And I actually left off the last bit of the quote. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. And maybe you're like me, sometimes you treat it as moderately important. You know it's not of no importance, but sometimes we don't place it as high as nothing more important. And the reason why it can't be moderately important is because if Jesus is the Son of God, the teachings are more than just good ideas, they're actually divine insights. If Jesus rose from the dead, he is alive today and able to help us on a personal basis. If he conquered death, he can open the door of eternal life for us as well. If Jesus now has divine power, he absolutely has the ability to guide and help us and transform us. If Jesus personally knows the pain of loss and suffering, he can comfort and encourage us. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the verdict is over to you to draw your conclusion based on the evidence that we have explored. The decision is yours and yours alone to consider.